Hello, good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here at Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald Stewart. I'm joined from outside the studio with Jackie Kemp, a well-known journalist who will be with us fairly shortly. Jackie, good to see you and welcome to the programme.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Fantastic. So, we do not, however, start with fantastic news. It's been another tough day in Ukraine as we go to the 244th day of the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The Donetsk Oblast has been hit hard in the past 24 hours, and at least 15 Russian strikes killed 7 civilians, injuring 3 others. Ukrainian National Police said the strikes also destroyed 19 residential buildings and 1 power line. Amid air raid sirens, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier arrived in Kyiv for his first trip to Ukraine since Russia invaded. Meanwhile, in Berlin, European leaders convened for a conference on Ukraine's reconstruction, where President Vladimir Zelensky told the conference in a video address that more than a third of the country's energy sector has been destroyed by rockets and Iranian drones. Ukrainian authorities have estimated, meanwhile, that Russian forces have lost nearly 68,420 personnel since the start of the invasion. Russia's grip on the city of Kherson appears increasingly fragile, and Russian forces seem to be preparing to withdraw from the east bank of the Dnieper River in the face of the advancing Ukrainian counter-offensive. Russia is bringing new military units into Kherson as it prepares to defend the city in the face of the advancing Ukrainian counter-offensive. Ukraine and the United States denounced suggestions from Russia that Ukraine was preparing to use a dirty bomb as dangerous lies. The UN nuclear watchdog is preparing to send inspectors in the coming days to 2 Ukrainian sites after Kyiv requested that an expert mission be sent to disprove Russian claims that Ukraine plans to use such a dirty bomb. The United States has had no indications that Russia has decided to use nuclear, biological or chemical weapons, a US military official confirmed. The United Nations has also said that urgent steps are needed to relieve a backlog of more than 150 ships involved in a deal that allows Ukraine to export grain from the ports in the Black Sea. President Zelensky has urged Israel to join the fight against Russia and repeated an appeal for Israeli air defense systems. Furthermore, pro-Kremlin television presenter Anton Krasovsky has been accused of inciting genocide after calling for Ukrainian children to be drowned and burned alive during an interview on the state-funded RT channel. Jackie, it is increasingly a story which every day just seems to add more misery onto more misery, and certainly with the suggestion that Russia has made that the Ukraine are going to detonate some kind of dirty bomb. It's not just on the ground that things are getting a bit messy and dirty. It would appear in that sort of media focus and drive that they have. They're trying to tell a story and a narrative that perhaps is some way from the truth.
I think that is their typical route, isn't it? I mean, confusion to our enemies is a sort of old naval toast, I think, and Russia certainly takes that to heart. So I think it's always been evident that if they were going to use any kind of escalation or nuclear weapon, they would muddy the water. And also I think the nuclear power station has sort of been turned into potential form of armament, but of course any fallout from that would affect Russia. So it's the fog of war. It's hard to tell what will happen really.
And domestically, we of course are seeing hopefully the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom are going to go third time lucky, as Rishi Sunak has moved into 10 Downing Street and he started to name his cabinet. He has used his first speech as Prime Minister to warn that the United Kingdom is in the grip of an economic crisis, as he vowed to fix mistakes made by Liz Truss and win back voters' trust. Speaking from Downing Street just over an hour after Truss delivered an unapologetic resignation speech, Sunak said his government would demonstrate integrity, professionalism and accountability, stressing a change in approach from the last 2 Tory administrations. Sunak, the UK's second unelected Prime Minister in 7 weeks, sought to head off calls for a general election by insisting he would stick to the Conservatives' 2019 manifesto that won the party an 80-seat majority. He said the victory was not the sole property of any one individual, but a mandate that belongs to and unites all of us, which was a swipe at those Tory MPs who have insisted he should seek a fresh endorsement from the public. Though Sunak said he admired Truss's restlessness to create change, he said he was clear that some mistakes were made, and he believed that he had been chosen by Tory MPs to fix them. Amid speculation he will be forced to cut public spending to plug a roughly £30 billion fiscal black hole, the new Prime Minister said there were difficult decisions to come, but highlighted the furlough scheme he devised during the pandemic and insisted, "I will bring that same compassion to the challenges we face today." Sunak has made the first appointments of his reshuffle in keeping Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, appointing Dominic Raab as Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary after the departure of nearly a dozen Cabinet Ministers. He went on to reappoint James Cleverly as the Foreign Secretary, Ben Wallace as Defence Secretary, Suella Braverman returns as Home Secretary. Penny Mordaunt was offered her old job as Commons Leader instead of the Foreign Secretary post she had pushed for. Steve Barclay returned as Health Secretary, and Michael Gove, who was fired as Community Secretary by Johnston, also got his old job back at Levelling Up Minister. Teresa Coffey moved for Deputy Prime Minister to Environmental Secretary. Mel Stride, Sunak's campaign manager during the summer leadership, becomes Work and Pension Secretary. Nadeem Zahawa becomes party chair, and Oliver Dowden becomes Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Grant Shapps becomes Business Secretary, and as we go to air, Alistair Jack is expected to stay as Secretary of State for Scotland. However, several senior figures quit the government on Tuesday, including Jacob Rees-Mogg stepping down as Business Secretary, Brandon Lewis resigning as Justice Secretary, and Sunak chose to sack Chloe Smith as Work and Pension Secretary, and the under fire Wendy Morton, the Chief Whip. Others leaving the government include Jake Berry, Conservative Party Chair, Robert Buckland, Wealth Secretary, Ranil Jayawardena, the Environment Secretary, and Kit Malthouse, the Education Secretary. Vicky Ford, the Foreign Office Minister for Development, who attended Cabinet under Truss, has left the government too. Jackie, it does appear that there has been some wholesale change, but is it really just rearranging the deck chairs and we're looking for the iceberg, which is a general election, to follow on soon?
Well, it's watch this space. I did predict that it was going to be Rishi Sunak and it was going to be a coronation. I thought that was kind of the most likely thing to happen, and that has happened. I was a lot of the people who've been promoted are the same old kind of pro-Brexit ERG Tories, aren't they? They haven't broadened the pool. We've got Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. And I think I was appalled by that. When I heard that Suella Braverman was back, I could just picture her in that famous clip talking about her dream of seeing asylum seekers being deported to Rwanda, and I think she's an appalling Home Secretary, and I just couldn't believe that she was back. I guess I'd hoped for something better, and the only thing I liked about Truss's policy was I hoped that they would do a trade deal with India, and I hoped that we would be able to get, because Scotland is so in need of people to work in sectors like health and social care and agriculture, and we just don't have enough young workers, and we can't compete really. So I think I have certain areas of concern, and for Scotland, thinking about what this all means for Scotland, and I don't feel any reassurance really in what's happened today, other than I think the markets will calm down, and that's good for us all, because nobody wants mortgages to become unaffordable and for the pound to crash. That's not in anybody's interest. So I think I think that the markets will probably calm down, and Rishi Sunak may even introduce some tax rises. I mean, after all, the health and social care levy was a kind of Sunak policy, and I was surprised that the Labour Party and the SNP both wanted to get rid of that, because the bars for where it kicks in meant that people who earned under about 36,000 weren't even paying any more national insurance. It was only people over that, and it was quite progressive. It was more for wealthy people. So I thought that was actually a good tax, because I think we do have a need to invest more in the health service, I was I and I would be, I don't know whether Rishi Sunak is going to bring it back, probably not, but I would like to see something like that brought in
Well,
rather than austerity.
he did talk in his statement about compassion and how, the compassion that he had during the COVID crisis. Do you think that that was behind his decision to bring Michael Gove back? Because there is a former Aberdonian by default who has some connection to Scotland, but he had, for many observers, made that very public decision that he wasn't going to go back into cabinet at any point, and he wasn't returning to frontline politics. He had retired, and the spectre of Michael Gove returning into the cabinet seems to be, I don't know, it seems a very odd choice given his public pronouncements. But are there going to be more odd choices in terms of policy and so on as we go on?
Well, I mean, I suppose Gove's retirement was based on the fact that Liz Truss had gotten in, and he doesn't, he didn't obviously support her, uh, and that whole Liz Truss thing was extraordinary, wasn't it? The whole summer,
Mm.
she was going around the country saying that tax cuts were the best way to kickstart the economy, and my husband and I were laughing about that. It's ridiculous. Like, what's the best way to help the poor? Tax cuts. What's the best way to kind of resolve it? It was her answer to everything, and it was ridiculous. And I think, the whole country's been put through this absolutely bizarre sort of charade of democracy, where a few over 70s in Worthing get to vote on who's the next prime minister, and they obviously made a really bad choice, and now we're supposed to be glad that it's Rishi Sunak. But I certainly feel a bit resentful about having been put through this whole thing for months and months, when it was obvious that the strategy was one that wasn't. They went too far to the right. Even the Financial Times had a picture. They had a graphic of where all the right wing parties are that are in power all over the world, and under Truss, the British Conservatives were like to the right of the American Republicans. Economically speaking, they were so far right. They did cap. And the suspicion, I think, was that there was some kind of dirty work at the crossroads, that they'd been sort of, they were too close to the super wealthy, to hedge funds who were making money out of shorting the pound. I think it was all really quite extraordinary, and I think it's not done yet. I think there's still fallout from that
Well,
that we haven't
and
assessed.
well, certainly the trickle-down effects of the past few months are certainly being felt, as the energy crisis is allegedly pushing 10,000 homes a month onto prepayment meters. Cash-strapped households unable to afford their monthly energy bills are being pushed onto prepayment meters in a record number. 10,000 a month is being forecast to be installed this winter as the cost of living crisis deepens. The price comparison website USwitch said the startling trend after more than 2 years when the number of meters has been falling as more homes moved to direct debit was a worrying sign, as customers could disconnect when usage and bills were likely to be the highest at the coldest time of the year. The rise of prepayment meter numbers is a worrying reversal, they said, of a trend after 9 consecutive quarters falling, suggesting households are now becoming increasingly at risk this winter, according to Richard Newdig, Director of Regulation at USwitch. Families and individuals on prepayment meters, he continued, will be plunged into darkness as they self-disconnect when they can't afford to top up. The vast majority of suppliers put struggling customers on prepayment meters rather than disconnecting them. However, many of those customers then effectively disconnect themselves by not topping up the meter. Prepayment meters also cost the average household about £50 more a year in standing charges compared with an equivalent direct debit. Using Ofgem data, the comparison site found that 7.38 million homes were using prepaid meters in the first quarter, up from 7.35 million in the final 3 months of last year, which it estimated equated to almost 60,000 new meters being installed across the 6-month period. Uswitch said that based on current trends, it expected to see 10,000 more homes a month turn to prepayment meters this winter. It said consumers who were most likely to have to switch were those least able to afford rising energy costs, making them the most at risk of stopping top-up payments as costs continued to rise. Jackie, it's very difficult to find the superlatives left anymore as to just exactly how deep this crisis is.
It's true, it is deep. I was interested to see, though, that the gas price has gone down below $100 per megawatt hour today, or it went down over the weekend. That's the first time it's gone that low since the summer. And there's actually, Europe is using 20% less gas than it was at the same time this year. So it's actually extraordinary how much less gas is being used. And I think Britain was going to have a sort of campaign to kind of encourage people, public buildings, like in Germany, they've turned down the heating in public buildings to 19 degrees. But Liz Truss pulled that campaign on sort of libertarian grounds. But I think there is definitely an argument for us all trying to reduce the amount we use, because it's just going to make less chance of there being blackouts. And actually, people are now worried about blackouts in the following winter, because all the gas storage places in Europe are now really full of gas, so they can't really store anymore. Which is why because it's been a mild winter, and that's why the price is falling. On the subject of prepayment meters, I was interested to hear Jack Monroe, the bootstrap cook, saying that she actually chose to have a prepayment meter because of her fear of debt, really. And I think I don't think prepayment meters should be more expensive. I think they should be less expensive. And I don't think prepayment customers should pay standing charges. I think they should be, if they could be freed from standing charges, then I think for some people it's possibly better, because then you can sort of control when the money. See, if you have a direct debit and money just comes out of your account when there isn't any money, then you end up getting fined by your bank potentially for it going into the red, and that can probably work out more than £50 a year if you just don't have. So I think, because these direct debits are now hundreds of pounds a month, a lot of people are probably in that position where they actually end up paying, because, and then the companies have been taken to court because they're raising people's direct debits more than they actually should, because they're trying to get more money in, and they're sort of saying to people, oh, we need to raise your direct debit to £600 or £500 a month, based on maybe you using the same as you used last year. But if you're using 20% less, which seems like a general figure that lots of people are using 20% less, and maybe your direct debit doesn't need to leap up by that. So maybe having a prepayment meter can give someone a wee bit more control. And for some people that kind of, and this sounds awful, but what Jack was talking about was just this sort of fear of debt. So, I think for some people, you've got no money and the lights have gone out, might actually be better than you not being able to afford any food because your bank account's been emptied by the power company.
Well, the news doesn't get any better in terms of being on the front line for families, because the price of budget food items in supermarket has apparently increased by 17% this year to September. The prices of staples such as pasta, tea, chips have surged in the UK in the past year, with cooking oil shooting up 65%, according to figures that highlight how poorer households are being hit disproportionately by the cost of living crisis. The overall price of budget food items in supermarkets soared by 17%, according to data from the Office for National Statistics, nearly double the 9% annual increase measured in the 12 months to April before. The figures highlight how the poorer families are bearing the brunt of the cost of living, with prices for some budget grocery items soaring far ahead of the official 10.1% rate of inflation, which in itself is at a 40-year high. Amongst those prices that have risen significantly, Pasta has gone up by 60%, tea 65%, and chips 39%. Large price increases for other everyday low-cost items, including milk, biscuits and bread, have also followed. The SNP Shadow Chancellor, Alison Thewlis MP, said, "Under the Tories, inflation has run out of control. Mortgage rates are at their highest since the financial crisis, and energy bills have more than doubled. We cannot go on like this. There must be a general election so voters can have their say on the way forward." The SNP's Work and Pensions spokesperson, Kirsty Blackman MP, challenged Mel Stride, the new UK Government Work and Pensions Secretary, to commit to raising benefits and state pensions in line with inflation, warning the poorest must not be forced to pay the price for Tory failure. The price for Tory failure, Jackie, ultimately at the end of the day, just as we've discussed in terms of the prepayment meter, it would appear that even the budget items are running ahead of inflation to almost twice the rate of inflation, and therefore hitting the poorest families the hardest.
Yes, I know, and that's definitely that is definitely true, isn't it? And, I noticed that Iceland have decided to keep a few items at at the pre-inflation cost, and I think things like that are helpful, and yeah, I mean it's terrible. Inflation is really terrible, and I think I was talking to someone about this and about the trade unions going on strike and everything for more wages, and we need a kind of solidarity because not everybody can withdraw their labour. Like, you can't withdraw your labour if you're a pensioner or if you're a single mum that's got a disabled child. So I think we need a kind of social solidarity that includes everybody, and I guess I'm not sure quite how we get there. I mean, clearly, uh, I hope that there is a. I mean, I hope there is a general election. I hope that the benefits are raised in line with inflation. But even if they are, clearly that's not enough for people to survive on. I'm really glad that in Scotland, I think most primary school children get free school meals, and that's a lot better than in England, because I watched a Channel 4 program about actually only parents who earn less than £7,000 a year or something in England get free school meals. Like, not even everybody who's on benefit gets free school meals. So that's horrific, and I think at least in primary here most children get. But what about the secondary school kids? It's a shame to think of. So I think that's somewhere where we can build solidarity by maybe introducing more free school meals, for maybe older kids. But I know these things are all expensive, and the Scottish Government's budget depends on things from England. So, for instance, when I heard that Modern 2 was closing for the winter, I felt like that's probably a really sensible choice. There's an energy crisis. It doesn't have an exhibition on. Close it. I mean, it's not really in a good place to be a hub for people to keep warm. But maybe we can create more. We need to talk about resilience in a way that isn't like a justification for right-wing policies, but we still need to talk about resilience. Because there isn't a lot we can do at the moment in terms of forcing a general election in Scotland. Here in Scotland, we're quite powerless on that front, I think.
Absolutely. And if the new Prime Minister was looking to have some respite from the business sector, he is going to be really struggling, because the CBI has warned Rishi Sunak against austerity. The head of the Confederation of British Industry I warned Sunak against pursuing an austerity doom loop of cuts to public spending and tax rises amid fears over a mixed outlook for the economy. Tony Danker, the Director General of the CBI, said it was vital for the new Prime Minister not to repeat the mistakes made by David Cameron's Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, when billions of pounds were slashed from public spending. Let's remember the 2010s began with some austerity and were then ensued with very low growth, zero productivity and lowest investment rate, he said. It wasn't a successful strategy for growth, he told Radio 4's Today programme. Today, UK government borrowing costs fell back to levels last seen before Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget a month ago, while the pound rose sharply against the dollar to trade close to $1.15, a level last seen in mid-September, as global investors welcome Sunak's taking over as Prime Minister. The yield or interest rate on 30-year gilts fell by about 0.1 percentage points to stand at 3.7% on a day of tumbling borrowing costs for governments across Europe amid a sharp drop in global gas prices. European natural gas prices have fallen below €100, 87 pounds per megawatt hour for the first time since Russia cut supplies earlier this summer, helped by milder weather and efforts to boost storage ahead of winter. Analysts said the development could reduce inflationary pressures and lower the cost of government interventions in the energy market across the continent. Jackie, I feel as though I am merely repeating what you said earlier on here in terms of that there are indications out there that there is something that we could do or could take advantage of, but the rhetoric and indeed the planning from down in Westminster would be, or would appear to be, ignoring that, or at least not taking on board what opportunities there may be.
The main opportunity would be to reverse Brexit. I mean, Brexit's costing the UK economy 4%. That's more than 100 billion a year is being lost to the UK economy. That's £2 billion a week. So, you know, if an independent Scotland could join the EU in the next couple of years, I think their growth would easily outpace that of the UK. You know, the single, simplest, easiest, booming way to just get on with some growth would be to just rejoin the single market. That would make a huge difference to everybody. And you can see that Northern Ireland's overtaken everywhere except for London in terms of growth because they still have access to the single market. I think the real reason that the UK government don't like the protocol is they don't want an example to be set to Scotland of how you can be in the UK and the EU at the same time, and you can get the both, get the best of both worlds. So yeah, I mean, if they're serious about growth, they'll rejoin the EU, or they'll at least rejoin the single market. Join EFTA or something. They could join EFTA tomorrow.
Do you think
Sorry,
Jackie, do you think the flaw in your plan there is the simplest, easiest thing to do, that might not necessarily be the thing they go for?
Well, they're just, if they don't, they're just ideologues, aren't they? I mean, they tried Brexit, it hasn't worked. The only way that it could possibly work was to create this kind of low tax, low regulation Singapore on sea. Liz Truss tried it, didn't work. It was a rubbish idea. Just stop flogging the dead horse, rejoin the single market. I mean, 27 countries on your doorstep. You can't even replace that by making trade deals with Australia. It's just not going to work. It's stupid. The whole thing is stupid and pointless and ideological. But unfortunately, Rishi Sunak said in his little tour around Britain, he said several times that he wanted to get rid of even the ENHC, or the human rights thing. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to take us on to Qatar, and the human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell has been stopped by police in Qatar while staging a protest against the Gulf states' criminalisation of LGBTQ plus people. Tatchell's protest outside the National Museum of Qatar in the capital Doha comes less than a month before the start of the FIFA World Cup, which is expected to attract 1.2 million visitors from around the world. Reuters reported that 2 uniformed police officers and 3 plainclothes officials arrived at the scene. They folded up his placard and took photos of Tatchell's passport and other papers, and those of a man who was accompanying him. Police left after shaking hands with him, who remained on the sidewalk. Tatchell said he and a colleague, Simon Harris, who filmed the protest, were arrested and detained at the scene, but the Qatari government has denied this. Tatchell, a veteran campaigner, was holding a placard that read, "Qatar arrests, jails and subjects LGBT to conversion. #Qatar anti-gay." The Peter Tatchell Foundation said it was the first LGBT plus protest in Qatar or in any Gulf state. The incident adds to mounting pressure on Qatar over its treatment of the LGBTQ plus community and migrant workers, as well as other human rights concerns. Qatari law criminalises both male and female homosexuality, with sentences of 1 to 2 to 3 years for adults convicted of consensual gay or lesbian sex. Jackie, it would be easy to dismiss anybody going somewhere in order to have that type of protest as a kind of hobby horse. But there's a serious thing at the back of this. We're looking to the post that over 1 million people going to visit. The global eyes through football is going to be very much on Qatar in the next month or so. But there have been so many stories of human rights abuses and indeed the denigration of any gay or lesbian person within Qatar, that this is a very serious aspect to it and one that should not be taken lightly.
Well, it is serious, and it is difficult. It's a difficult decision to have to have something like that in Qatar, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. Some people might argue that it's an opportunity to kind of engage with a different regime, but I just don't know why they decided to have it in Qatar. Why not just have it somewhere less controversial? I mean, I think it's good on Peter Tatchell. That's a courageous thing to do, and he has been a long-standing campaigner for gay rights, and he's obviously gone there in order to draw attention to the status of LGBT people in that country. So good for him. Whether it'll make any difference or not, I don't know. What do you think about I don't know much about football. Sorry. What do you think about having the Football World Cup in Qatar?
Well, I do know quite a bit about football, and the difficulty, I think, with all of this is that there are certain allegations that this has been a corrupt decision, that money has played more than a part in the Soccer World Cup ending up in Qatar. It's been moved from its traditional summer into winter, which disrupts many of the leagues, because now international players are going to have to leave leagues in order to compete in the World Cup, which lessens the effect that they have within the domestic competitions, and therefore the ordinary consumer, the customer, the fan, the supporter on the terraces is not going to see the best of their clubs because that decision has been taken. I think also, more importantly, it's another example of how that part of the world has managed to, is it too much to suggest, bribe those of us in the West to accept that we might have a chance to influence them. But in actual fact, all that's going to happen is that they're going to get a platform globally to promote them as a holiday destination. Did we not have these debates when it was apartheid in South Africa and having tours, sporting tours in there in order to effect change? And it didn't really happen. I think people misunderstand the effect that sport has and the influence it has. So I am not convinced that this is a good thing for football.
And I think engagement with a regime like that has to be done quite carefully, doesn't it? With the idea of change at its heart. Like thinking about the South Africa thing, obviously, it's very different to have like a Soweto theatre production come over to your country, or, that's a different kind of engagement from just holding a big flashy tournament there. It sounds very dodgy, and perhaps it links up to what we were saying earlier about the kind of super rich having undue influence over our politics. I watched a video by Peter Oborn, the former journalist, where it was quite a clever video where he sort of cut it with bits of The Great Gatsby, and he was really making the point that Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, and all that group of cohort people were really in the pockets of the sort of difficult money, the dodgy money, and it sounds like football's got a bit of the same problem.
Certainly does. And over in America, another name of an entitled man who has once again back in court with graphic allegations, Harvey Weinstein, is being accused of assaulting young women hoping to make it in Hollywood. And a Los Angeles prosecutor argued on Monday, while the former producer's attorney said his accusers willingly took part in what he described as a casting couch culture to boost their careers. Weinstein, the man who became the face of #MeToo allegations 5 years ago, currently serving a 23-year prison sentence for sex crimes in New York, is now on trial in Los Angeles on 11 charges of rape and sexual assault, and has pleaded not guilty. In opening statements, Deputy District Attorney Paul Thompson offered graphic details and quotes from women who said Weinstein invited them to hotel rooms for purported business meetings between 1991 and 2015. Weinstein, seated in the courtroom in a dark suit and tie, occasionally shook his head whilst Thompson spoke. Alleged incidents involving 4 of the women are the basis of the charges against him. The other 4 women who had encounters outside of Los Angeles will be presented by prosecutors to try to establish a pattern of behaviour. Weinstein's lawyer, Mark Werksman, told jurors that each allegation was a weak and unsubstantiated trickle that will evaporate upon your close scrutiny. Thompson said none of the accusers spoke publicly at the time because they worried Weinstein could crush their careers. He showed the jury movie posters of Pulp Fiction, Shakespeare in Love, and other Weinstein productions. Weinstein, who's 70, was convicted in sexual misconduct in New York in February 2020, was extradited from New York to a Los Angeles prison in July 2021. In New York, Weinstein is also appealing his conviction and his 23-year prison sentence. He could face up to 140 years in prison if convicted on all of the charges in Los Angeles. And a spectre, a ghoul, a name, a privileged and entitled, a rich white man who, judging by the allegations that are made, judging by the convictions for which he is serving his prison sentence, it is all of a culture, is it not, in terms of how people behave and how people feel they are entitled to behave, which people are hoping will come crashing down, but here he is still professing his innocence.
Yeah, what a sort of terrifying monster. I think I can say that. Yeah, I think probably a lot of people knew what he was like, and it took so long for it to come out. It reminds you of other similar scandals like Epstein and that. I think Me Too was a really powerful moment, and I kind of big moment for social media, because we wouldn't have had Me Too without social media. Because people are always denouncing social media, but in the old days when all the media outlets were controlled by entitled white men, they would never have allowed something like Me Too to come to light. It was amazing, and I hope that has given women the sense that they can sort of speak out about things like that. Yeah, so let's hope that kind of culture has already taken a bit of a knock.
Yeah, and it was, of course, the son of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow who initially started to dig into Harvey Weinstein and exposed the whole. Not only, and I suppose we have a similar kind of thing with Jimmy Savile, where somebody was in a position not only of trust but also of great influence. Some of the chilling thoughts that, Jimmy Savile had the ability to write to our current king and advise over the media and so on, and that level of influence is just astonishing and startling.
I think, again, it was probably the same that a lot of people kind of knew. I mean, that's one reason that I'm so happy that the UN Commission on the Rights of the Child has been enacted into Scottish law almost entirely. The UK government hasn't allowed certain bits because they don't really want refugee children to have the same kind of rights as other children. But I think it's a rights-based culture. You have to tell children that they have rights, because they don't know that otherwise. If you tell children that they have rights and that they can speak up if people try to do things to them, then that's that rights-based culture. It's people understanding that children have rights, respecting the children's rights, and telling children that they have rights. That has to come before you get children to sort of speak up when adults treat them like that. And I think it's not the same, but I guess that can apply to people in any kind of unequal power relationship. If you're a young actress and you're kind of at the mercy of a powerful man who you feel you wouldn't be believed if you said what he'd done to you. So I think it's that's rights-based culture, and that sense of people being able to come forward and talk about these things, and not to be blamed and not to be shamed for it is really important. So I think children's rights is the foundation of having a more just society, really.
Absolutely. And homicides in Scotland have been reported at being at an all-time low in health-related news. Last year, they reached their lowest point since records began in 1976. The latest official figures released today show 53 people were the victim of homicide in 2021-22, six less than the previous year, down 54% over the past 15 years. This year, Scottish Government has provided partners with over £2 million for ongoing and new innovative violence prevention activity across Scotland, including an increase of 14% to the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit's budget. This funding builds on more than £24 million in government investment since 2008 as part of sustained efforts to prevent violence. This includes providing more than £16 million to the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, over £4.5 million to No Knives, Better Lives, a nationwide programme aimed at deterring young people from antisocial behaviour and carrying knives. Commenting today, Justice Secretary Keith Brown said, "Scotland continues to be a safe place to live, and this latest reduction in homicides is in line with the significant downward trend seen in other categories of violent crime over the past 15 years. However, every death caused by homicide is a tragedy that leaves grieving families and friends in its wake, which is why tackling all forms of violent crime continues to be a top priority for this government." And Jackie, the idea of criminally induced death and homicides and so on is all very well for a Netflix series, but certainly in everybody's life, it's good news to hear that there is a reduction, and the investment that's being put in would appear to be making a difference.
Well, yes, I hope that's the case, and I think I hope that continues to be the case. I suppose my sort of I'm thinking about the Sky situation where there was sadly a kind of a couple of people were killed in earlier this year, and I actually went to cover that tragic case. So any kind of homicide situation or any kind of death by violence situation is terribly traumatic for the community that happens in. Really, and that one on Sky left a number of children seriously traumatized, and it's the harm that is done goes on. When I lived in Boston, they had a murder garden. They created a murder garden near my office, and I just happened to be walking through it at the inauguration, and there was a lot of families there, and they'd done it like a peace tree and little memorial. I mean, obviously there are a lot more murders in the States, but it was really nice for people who, it's just really difficult to lose someone in your family to murder, and it was nice that they had a place that they could go to kind of remember their person. It's tragic, and I'm really glad that knife crime has been reduced in Scotland. I think Scotland was more of a, it was knife crime was obviously a very very common thing.
And I suppose it fits in very neatly with what you were saying about the UN Convention, that if we give people the information and the guidance and we enshrine in law the rights that they have, that there is an enablement for them in terms of being able to stand up. And if there's further investment in sort of what happens not only to prevent it, but also what happens in the aftermath, because it's very often the aftermath that much of the pain and hurt really does become very evident.
Yeah, and it's breaking that cycle, because I think there's lots of evidence that children who are violently chastised or beaten, and things like that, they tend to become more violent. So it's kind of breaking that cycle sometimes in people's own families, where they question how they were taught to discipline their children, or how they were taught to think about that. And I think it's also working with families and parents to kind of create a more like a culture where people can discuss their issues, like less tribalism, where people can sort of respectfully disagree, that kind of thing is good. But yeah, it's important to kind of understand that. I came across a friend of mine who's of African origin said that some of her friends who are also of African origin have different cultural practices, and they haven't really come across things like the smacking ban in Scotland, and it's culturally unfamiliar. And she had a couple of horror stories about like a mum going to pick up her kid and like having the kid being taken into care because she'd smacked him. So I mean, it's probably an exaggeration, but I think it's important to understand that, you know, not every family has got the same understanding of children's rights, and that's why we have to really talk to people about why it matters and ask them to remember how they felt when they were a child and they were treated unjustly, and to just kind of tune into those feelings that we all had when we were little. So I think you know, yes, it's a cultural and community kind of work, isn't it? It's not just political.
Absolutely. And in terms of community, there's one community who has made a stand today as the National Trust for Scotland has formally objected to Flamingo Land and their Loch Lomond development. National Trust is Scotland's largest membership organisation and owns Ben Lomond and responsible for two of the Loch's islands. And they have written to the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park objecting to the proposed Flamingo Land development, which is due to be developed near Lomond shores. The NTS objected strongly to the development on the basis of the impact on ancient woodland, the likely impact on the local economy and traffic congestion. In their letter, the NTS say that they are concerned that there will be direct loss and potential damage to a significant area of ancient woodland across the site, which they do not support, and that the attraction of the extra jobs and enhanced tourism offering this would bring to the Balach area, which is understandable. However, it seems at such a scale it would draw business away from the existing tourism businesses and compete with them for a limited supporting labour market. The NTS say they are mindful that the scale of this development may disturb the very values visitors are looking for when they come to the area. The Scottish Greens MSP for West Scotland, Ross Greer, commented, "I'd like to thank the National Trust for their powerful objection, which makes a very strong case for Flamingo's Land's plans to be rejected. It joins a long list of other respected voices, including Woodlands Trust, Rambler Scotland, over 32,000 members of the public who have objected via their online portal, the vast majority of respondents to two recent surveys of local residents. Even the National Park's own Estates Department has expressed severe concerns about aspects of the plans." Jackie, we were talking earlier on about how Scotland could do with an influx of people, and you were talking about the hope for some kind of deal with India, because we need people to support our industries and come and be employed in them. And here's an interesting case where National Trust for Scotland is saying that there's a need to protect the businesses and indeed the sort of tourist attractions within the local area already, and adding something on top of it is not necessarily going to enhance the offer.
I mean, you know, I don't know enough to comment specifically about Flamingo Land, although it does seem like a slightly odd odd kind of thing to do there, because it. But I mean, as when it comes to National Trust for Scotland, I mean, who do they actually speak for? I mean, who says they're for Scotland? It's actually the National Trust. It's actually the National Trust England with a sort of Scottish hat on, and I really object to the National Trust's continuous sort of vexatious objection to any kind of onshore wind. So they just recently had a huge sort of publicity campaign. They wrote to the Scottish Government's land reform consultation. They had articles in all of the papers complaining about onshore wind. And when I sort of looked into it, there's very little coherence to their objection, because their idea of wild land often is like land that was cleared of every person for a grouse moor. And therefore, in their view, became wild. And they think if you go for a walk on a hill and like you see a wind turbine, it doesn't feel wild. So it's not wild anymore. It doesn't feel like wildland. Whereas, I think we need to all be very concerned about the climate emergency. Onshore wind is the cheapest, fastest way. With the energy crisis, onshore wind is if we could get through planning, we could build wind turbines in months. Onshore wind, they're much cheaper to service, they're much more reliable. And things like the National Trust for Scotland and the John Muir Trust just consistently object. And they're not speaking for anybody except for their members, many of whom are down south. So you never hear, they talk about certain things, but they don't talk about other things. and they have this mania for peatland restoration, and I think they've the science of that is quite dubious. It's quite hard to photograph any peatland that's not damaged, but there's lots of peatland that isn't damaged, and there's no actual reason why you can't restore peatland around wind turbines like they've done in Strathclyde. So in Strathclyde, which is a very beautiful set of wind turbines that are linked to the hydro, the John Muir Trust objected to that for like 7 years. And in the end, the John Muir Trust were ordered to pay costs because so you've got me onto a little bit of a hobby horse, which is like, who do these charities speak for? Really, just their members. They don't speak for anybody else.
I mean, I think what's interesting about it is, you started by saying, Flamingo Land seems an odd place. I can't remember the last time I talked to a flamingo in Loch Lomond, but, it just seemed to come on the back of, I think it was Go Ape, who had at one point also had a plan to do something in sort of Loch Lomond area. And when the National Trust objected to that, it's almost, sometimes I think it feels like a photocopied objection that's merely going to continue, that no is no to anything rather than no is no to what might be of benefit to the locals.
Yeah, like what damage is the zip wire going to do, really? I mean, I suppose you could argue that it's the car parking, but I think it's just, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think that is the difficulty. If you end up getting reputation for just having hired a lot of people to protect everything, and people stop taking you seriously. So I think it's interesting to sort of think about ways that we can offer our kids more adventure sport. We have a lot of, not to put find a point into it, we seem to have quite a lot of Rajas in Scotland. They like high adrenaline, high octane activity. If you can give them access to adventure sport, to the outdoors, to those kinds of activities, that can really transform a young person's life. So I think those kinds of, I'd be more interested in a zip wire than in a kind of flamingo land, because it's just I suppose I'm just more interested in that. But I think creating opportunities for our young people to engage with sport and with the world of nature is really cool.
And finally tonight, Scottish Government funding to support Gaelic education and community projects has been announced. That they are going to benefit from almost £3 million as part of plans to expand the reach of the language across Scotland. The Gaelic Capital Fund, which is now in its 14th year, will help support the growth of a number of projects over the coming year. It will include developing Gaelic school units in Tain and Skye, supporting the development of Gaelic in Barra, improving facilities at the Glasgow Gaelic School, delivering a new classroom at Tong Primary School in the Isle of Lewis. Education Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville commented on the news today, Gaelic is a vital part of Scotland's cultural identity, and we are determined that it continues to flourish by improving access for people to both learn and use the language at every opportunity possible. The Gaelic Capital Fund has helped to deliver a number of key projects since its launch in 2008, including the establishment of 7 new Gaelic schools. We will further strengthen, she continued, Gaelic and Scots by increasing the number of people using these languages. To that end, we will introduce a Scottish Languages Bill this parliamentary term. I would encourage everyone to have their say in our ongoing Gaelic and Scots consultation as we look to secure their future. Jackie, language is, we always have to mind it whenever we're broadcasting and writing, but here it's quite clear that the 2 principal Indigenous languages of this country are going to be supported both with finance and also with legislation in order to back some of that up, and it would be a positive step in the right direction.
I think that's fantastic. And I'd also like to see a bit more kind of partnership working. Like, I'd like to see a bit more collaboration between organisations like the National Theatre for Scotland, the orchestras, with these languages. I was talking to Dolly McLennan the other day, and she was telling me about the time in the 70s when she went around the Highlands doing a kind of Gaelic. She was singing in Gaelic, and there was a Gaelic ballet with Scottish Ballet. It was a collaboration between Dolly and Scottish Ballet. And that's really popular because you're kind of building a taste culture. You're bringing people in from various bodies and bringing them together. And I think it's quite hard to see that happening now because there seems to be a bit of a professionalization of culture. It's a bit removed from the grassroots, and I think when you're talking about those languages, you also need to make sure that you're building kind of a taste for them and a comprehension of them in the wider population, because one of the problems with Gaelic is that one English speaking person in a community meeting, everyone has to talk English, or a lot of English speaking people, they go into a bar, and if people are talking Gaelic, they might feel that they're deliberately excluding them, but there's always going to be an English speaking person there. So how do we get people in the rest of Scotland, in the mainstream schools? I think they should have a little bit more Gaelic or more Scots, maybe summer schools. So I think that kind of, I don't want Gaelic to be marginalised. I think it's.
Well, that is it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you, as Jackie was talking about communities, that we here at Broadcasting Scotland, as a community, depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford as little as £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So from me, Donald Stewart, here at Broadcasting Scotland Studios, it's good night. Thank you for watching.